The case of JoAnn Matouk Romain is an interesting one. There's so many questions. How police handled evidence, where her body was found. Now, the case is still open, but the police agency in charge of it isn't willing to talk. As a matter of fact, just a few weeks ago, I spoke with Grosse Pointe Farms Police Chief Jensen. He said he was considering an interview, but then canceled after city attorneys told him not to speak. So let's take a look at what he said in the past. "11 years after the disappearance and death of JoAnn Matouk Romain, there are still so many questions."
So you've got a crime scene trampled all over, and nothing's properly photographed or documented.
That is just one of the many criticisms of the Grosse Pointe Farms Police, coming from 25-year veteran Martin County Sheriff Detective Salvatore Restrelli.
Well, the one thing I want to say about the whole investigation that they conducted up there, it was so out of typical police procedure that alone is suspicious.
Restrelli was hired by the Romain family to learn more about their mother's death. JoAnn Matouk, who according to police, walked into Lake St. Clair January 12th of 2010 and killed herself.
Based on the investigation, more than likely it was a suicide.
That's Grosse Pointe Farms Police Chief Dan Jensen. We asked to talk to him on camera. He was not willing. So we are using his deposition in the family's civil lawsuit against the police department to help explain how and why police reacted the way they did.
The first clues at the scene showed a single set of footprints across from the car into the water. Sit down, slide to this next level, and into the water. We went into rescue mode.
There was not one photograph that could depict a high-heel shoe. There were work boots and probably, the medics or the policemen that were on the scene. You could see a few of their footwear impressions. None of the footwear impressions were taken with a scale in place. Every death investigation that is in any way suspicious, an accident or what people may think is an outright suicide, has to be investigated as if it's a homicide.
Restrelli says there were numerous questionable police practices. First, the idea JoAnn walked to her death.
I never believed for 1 minute that JoAnn went down that ramp, then negotiated the broken concrete and exposed rebar without falling or getting injured and would have been found right there at the scene.
Another concern, the fingerprinting of JoAnn's vehicle.
They brought it into their garage at their police station and they threw dust around. Well, first of all, you can't dust leather seats and vinyl seats. They're corrugated. The only way to get fingerprints off of something like that is through good extreme photography with lighting after you fume the interior of the car with super glue. And that was never done.
And why no DNA check of the car?
There's no sign, no evidence of any kind of violent crime that would warrant a DNA check.
Family disagrees. JoAnn's new purse was found inside that Lexus SUV. Photos show the purse was torn. Restrelli believes the tear is consistent with someone roughly grabbing the purse as if in a struggle. During Matouk's autopsy, a bruise was found on her arm.
Like when someone grabs a purse off a woman's shoulder hard enough to bruise her.
And then there's JoAnn's body, found 70 days after she disappeared by some fishermen in Amhertsburg, Ontario, near Boblo Island.
Her body was placed in the water somewhere near that area. It just doesn't make any sense when you examine her remains, months later, where she doesn't have any of the typical things you would see on a drowning victim that would have traversed 30 miles of waterway.
The detective pointed out JoAnn's shoes had no signs of being scratched, scuffed, or damaged. In the Canadian autopsy report, it concludes coroner believes that there is not enough cogent or convincing evidence that she did intend to take her life. Then there was JoAnn's death, ruled a dry drowning, meaning there was no water in her lungs. With a dry drowning, that means air is in your lungs, not water, which makes you buoyant. Dr. David Smith, who is an expert in the investigation of water-related deaths and accidents, stated in his deposition, "My belief that she was extremely buoyant and the documented lack of current, there is a high possibility that someone would have seen her floating." But we know crews searched and searched for JoAnn that night and the following day. She could not be found. Dr. Smith also stated, where she drowned and when she drowned, I believe, are subject to discussion. There's also a question about how the police handled evidence. Remember that man witnesses said they saw running strangely by the lake the night JoAnn disappeared? He reportedly had a black scarf on. According to one of the Grosse Pointe Farms officers' depositions,
it was released out of the property system in 2015. It was donated in November of 2010.
Clearly bad record keeping. And remember, this case is still open. Why release evidence? Then there are JoAnn's car keys.
The very next day, after her disappearance, keys to her car suddenly reappear at the police department.
JoAnn's daughters have said their mother's spare car keys went missing from their Morningside home about 6 weeks before JoAnn's disappearance.
Keys that had gone missing a month earlier. No record of where those keys came from. No record of who gave them to the police. The officer couldn't tell me anything about this, and that gave me some very serious questions as to where he really got those keys from. Questions that I don't know the answer to. But his story makes no sense.
And why, since the case is open, won't the Grosse Pointe Police Department talk?
Why would you not investigate this case thoroughly enough to where you could really hang your hat on your decision?
Is there a conspiracy, a cover-up, or just questionable police work? Our investigation continues. Coming up, did a meeting with federal agents really occur days before JoAnn died?
I've had sources tell me that she actually had a meeting with the FBI.
Was she paranoid?
It wasn't because she had some mental issue or mental disorder that was causing her to feel like that. It was stark reality.
Coming up, find out what her doctors had to say.
Basically, everything about this case is disturbing.
A 55-year-old mother of 3 dead. The case still open, and so many questions still more than a decade later.